This morning, the choir sang for the anthem, "My Shepherd is a Living God." The ancient words of the psalmist are lifted up in this modern setting, and it reminds us that this shepherd isn't just an ancient relic, but a living metaphor for our lives now. It speaks to our condition today, guiding us through treacherous terrains, leading us to peaceful waters, restoring us. And speaking of treacherous terrains, last Monday I was returning from the peninsula after celebrating Cinco de Mayo, and I took a different route home, and I got caught in a snarl of traffic that we're all very familiar with in the Bay Area, and it was on 880, and it was on 101, and it was on the bridges. I was trapped, bumper to bumper on the freeway. And all of us were there in this reluctant community of the stalled and frustrated. Have you been there? Yep. The man in the pickup truck to my right was gesturing emphatically, and I was really glad I didn't hear the words that he was saying, but I could have guessed. The woman on my left was speaking on her phone. Her face was this map of concern. All of us were trapped together. And I found myself thinking about sheep. How strange, right there in the middle of traffic, interstate traffic. But as I sat there, feeling the smallness of my Honda Civic, looking at the enormous trucks behind me and ahead of me, I wondered if this is how sheep feel in a pressing flock, all hemmed in on all sides, unsure of where they're going, corralled. I was thinking of it too when we try our best to recite the unison prayer, and it's like the way sheep are. It's hard to herd them too, right? But for most of us, sheep aren't really a part of our daily experience, are they? When Jesus said, in the context of that time, "I'm the good shepherd," they knew what he was talking about, but I think the driving metaphor might make more sense for us. Because then they knew about shepherds, the smell of them, the way they walked, the sound of their particular call that would separate their flock from another flock. Well, the sheep were looking for them, listening for them at the watering place. But for us, shepherds exist mostly in storybooks and Christmas pageants, wearing bathrobes and towels over our heads, or the children doing that, and holding on to the towel on our heads with either mom's belt or dad's tie. But they're not familiar to us. Yet when Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice," I know them and they follow me, something still resonates with us. Even in our modern world of podcasts and social media, we understand what it means to recognize a voice that speaks to our deepest selves. We know the difference between the voices that agitate us, you know what I'm talking about, and the voice that brings us peace. So this past Friday, before folks arrived for movie night to remember Pope Francis, I walked right in here and I looked out the window. I love this time of year, and the warm sunlight was starting to filter through these windows that we know so well. And the silence was complete, except every now and then I could hear the breezes outside or the creaking of this building. And then I looked down at the labyrinth, and I followed its meandering path, and thought about how much easier it is to hear the voice of that shepherd in that silence than in the cacophony of voices we hear in social media and they're stuck in traffic. The Good Shepherd knows each of us by name, and we know the shepherd's voice as tender as our mother's voice. The Good Shepherd knows us, not as a demographic, not as a potential donor, not as a political constituent, but as a creature beloved because of just who we are, because we are. Do you know what that feels like? Can you imagine it? To be known completely and loved completely, not just for what you contribute or produce or achieve, but simply because of who you are. And so as I walked the labyrinth, I tried to imagine, what would that be like? To be loved like that, to be really loved like that. What if you are? What if I am? What if we all are? Every single person, even on that crowded freeway, I was stuck in traffic. That man on the phone saying words I didn't want to hear. What if every child at risk of deportation is? What if every hungry family is? What if our worth doesn't depend on our usefulness or productivity or citizenship status, but it's simply a given, as free as the sunlight? The religious authorities of Jesus' time asked for clarity. Tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? They wanted certainty. They wanted a doctrinal statement that they could either affirm or deny. But Jesus instead points to his actions. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me. It's as if he's saying, don't listen to my words or my claims. It's like, listen to the walk. Watch how I live. See how I treat the vulnerable. Notice who I eat with. Notice who I pay attention to. Who I touch. So this past month, a cardinal from Chicago who became a citizen of Peru was elected Pope. And he chose the name Leo the 14th, echoing Pope Leo the 13th, who in the Gilded Age defended workers' rights and spoke of society's obligation to care for its most vulnerable members. It became part of the Catholic worker movement. Our new Pope's first words emphasized building bridges and dialogue and staying open to receiving everyone with open arms. Everyone, especially those who are suffering. Meanwhile, here at home, our vice president has been invoking a Catholic concept called Ordo Amoris to support policies that prioritize citizens over immigrants, suggesting a hierarchy of obligation that expands outward in concentric circles from one's immediate family to their neighbors, to their nation, and lastly, to those outside of the borders. And in a letter to the American bishops in February of this year, just 2 months before he died, Pope Francis disagreed, writing that Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests, and that true Ordo Amoris builds a fraternity open to all, without exception. How many of you remember hearing the stories of the Good Shepherd when you were little, or reading books, or playing with those little felt boards? It all seems so wonderful, didn't it? Those little fluffy white sheep, and everything was so clean and orderly. But real sheep aren't like that. Have you ever spent time with sheep? Or watching them? Not really. They're more like the traffic I was talking about, or more like what happens when we try to sing or read together in unison. They wander off. They get in trouble. They smell. They push. And the real Jesus, the Good Shepherd, goes looking for them. There's a story about a man on the peninsula in Palo Alto who bumped into this fancy new Tesla just ever so gently in a parking lot, and the owner of the car erupted in anger, berating this other man publicly, just extremely angry about it. And the man's friend, the one who bumped gently, there were no scratches, stepped up and said, "Don't talk to him like that." And when the angry car owner, Tesla car owner, retorted, "I'm talking to him, I'm not talking to you," the friend said, "When you're talking to him, you're talking to me." That's what it means to be a good shepherd, to stand in solidarity with those who are bullied, oppressed, marginalized, humiliated. Jesus says the hired hand wouldn't do that. The hired hand would say, "Not my problem." The shepherd, in relationship, in love, says, "When you're talking to him, you're talking to me." John tells us, last week we heard the story of Jesus rising from the dead and appearing to Peter on the beach, the disciple who denied him 3 times. And instead of recrimination, Jesus asks him the simple question 3 times. Not, "Why'd you do it? Why'd you abandon me?" Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And when Peter said yes, every time, exasperated, "You know everything about me. You know I love you." Jesus didn't say, "Well, great, I forgive you." He says, "Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs." Do you see the pattern here? Peter wasn't a shepherd when it began. He was anything but a rock. He was fragile, feeble, frightened, fallible. He was a sheep in desperate need of forgiveness. And he's commissioned now to become a shepherd. The one who needed grace is given grace, receives grace, and extends it. The one who was lost is found and is sent to find the lost. I think about this pattern when I consider what the gathering is at its best, the ecclesia. People come as sheep to be fed, hungry, thirsty, confused, afraid. We come needing to be fed, to be watered, to be found, to be kept safe. And having received these gifts, we're then sent out as shepherds. As sheep, we come to worship, to find restoration in nature, in music, in community, in timeless stories. We seek restoration in a world that so often excludes and silences and marginalizes and renders far too many people as outsiders. And in experiencing welcome, love, inclusivity, we're healed and we become healers. As sheep, some of us come to attend concerts, just like last week's Oakland School for the Arts, and others serve to support them, and we serve to support these programs to provide a space of beauty and community for young artists, where they can develop and showcase their gifts. As sheep, we acknowledge that we are literally standing on stolen land, a lonely land, and that our own healing is bound up in restoration, the healing of historic wounds. And having faced this truth, we support Sogorea Te. As sheep, we recognize our vulnerability, our own vulnerability to economic hardship. And having received help in hard times, we support the Black Wealth Builders Fund through events like our upcoming reparations, rummage sale, recognizing that the accumulation of white wealth was built on systemic dispossession of Black communities. As sheep, we know what it means, what it feels like to be imprisoned in fear, addiction, or despair. And having experienced liberation, we advocate for those struggling with addiction, those living in our county jails, including Santa Rita. As sheep, we know what it means to be strangers. And having found welcome, we support Nueva Esperanza and Iglesia Presbyteria with food and financial donations, because we're aware of families right now that are at risk of deportation. This past week, I was at Safeway, standing in another long line with the other sheep. I didn't go to the self-checkout, and the woman in front of me was counting out her change, and she was separating quarters from nickels and dimes, and I could see her face was really tense, concentrating, and her items were really basic: beans, rice, milk, a loaf of bread. And behind me, a man was audibly exacerbated. He was shuffling on his feet, and the cashier's face seemed impassive, but I could sense her growing impatience. And time seemed to pass, and it was this moment of unspoken impatience and judgment. And I started thinking about the SNAP programs, thinking about those I know who live and depend on those programs. And I thought about Coretta Scott King's words after her husband's assassination: starving a child is violence, and yet in this wealthy country, 1 in 5 children in our nation goes to bed hungry. Congress is considering cutting $230 billion of food assistance over the next decade. I wondered, do we hear the shepherd's voice in this moment? Do we recognize that when we're talking about those people who need food stamps, the shepherd says, when you're talking about them, you're talking about me. Our vision as a church from our retreat back at the end of March calls us as inspired by the faith of Jesus, as Howard Thurman put it, just not necessarily the institution created in Jesus' name, but inspired by the way of Jesus. Calls us to include and invite our wider neighborhood, people who are younger and more racially diverse than we are, into this mystery of being both sheep and shepherds. We know that what our wider community values most is the belief that God is love. Pure and simple, God is love. And the desire for belonging. And we know that what concerns our neighbors most these days, our wider community, social tensions, racial justice, financial security. These are not separate from our spiritual lives. They're integral to them. So we come here, gathering every week, this little flock, looking out into this window of creation to restore our souls. Some of us will go down and walk the labyrinth before or after the service. Some of us will sit in silence. We allow ourselves to be sheep again, to remember what it feels like to be led to the places of stillness, green pastures, that which restores us. And having been filled, we go to fill others. Some of us, right after the service, will go out and celebrate Mom's Day. Some of us will hang out and talk about the latest pope. Some of us will talk about plans for the rummage sale. Some will write cards to loved ones, call our mothers or remember our mothers. Some will just rest, getting ready for Monday, the work day. And all of these are the expression of the same divine pattern: giving and receiving, tending, being tended to, being found, and finding. After the sermon, we'll sing the familiar song, The Summons, and I invite you to hear it in a different way as the summoning of a shepherd with the persistent questions. Will you come and follow me? The shepherd asks, not just to greener pastures or still waters, places of comfort and rest, but to risky places where we must use our voice to seek the lost, and perhaps to even suffer for love's sake. God who invites us to be fed is the same God who sends us forth to feed others, who calls us to leave our boats and nets, our familiar lives and comforts, and follow unfamiliar paths. And I invite you this week to notice those moments when you need the shepherd. Don't numb out. Don't rush past it. Don't pretend to be stronger than you are, because vulnerability is strength. Allow yourself to rest when you need rest, to be fed, to be seen, to be listened to be understood, to be loved, to be kept safe. And And from that place, having received, extend that same care to someone else, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of this joyful recognition that this is who we are, both sheep and shepherd, both hungry and fed, both lost and found. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know my own, and my own know me. It's a relationship. It's a love relationship. It's a love relationship with God. Jesus' revolutionary claim, God, the absolute transcendent creator of the universe, loves me like daddy, mommy, a relationship. May we be known, and may we know ourselves, known by the one who laid down his life for all. May we receive the deep comfort of being loved. And through this knowing and being known, may we become shepherds to a world in desperate need of love. A love that knows no borders, that ranks no belonging. A love that sees every hungry child, every refugee, every prisoner, every person facing deportation. The face of God. Amen. And so let's join in singing the summons, number 22.